From the terrifyingly fleshy clicker costumes to getting through more than 100 potential actresses for the role of Ellie. These are some behind-the-scenes facts that made the HBO hit series The Last of Us possible. Starting off with how the clickers were made. Rather than relying on CGI, like most zombie movies, The Last of Us's live-action clickers were constructed largely with practical effects. The series employed more traditional methods of increasing the tension, and images from BTS showing actors in clicker costumes confirmed that. Overall, this proved to be a more efficient method. The post-apocalyptic world of The Last of Us has a rough, Wild West aesthetic, making CGI seem out of place. Even though CGI is usually the way to go for special effects these days, The Last of Us chose to use a more traditional scare instead. After all, CGI can sometimes get close to the uncanny valley, and in the modern era of cinema and TV, bad CGI is what stands out the most. So I believe it was a great call from the creators. Honestly, it worked out great. It's uncanny how similar the live-action clickers are to their digital counterparts. Both the costuming and the cinematography for The Last of Us were impressive, and it also showed that a lot of care and attention was put into paying tribute to the source material. Choosing the practical effects method for these zombie-like beasts ultimately made the series immeasurably better. The Last of Us's live-action clickers are what really set it apart from other zombie shows, and they proved that going with actual effects was the way to go. But the clickers weren't the only monster highlights of the show. If you think the clickers in the series are terrifying, wait till you see the Bloater. The Bloater, a large, lumbering enemy in the first The Last of Us game. Is one of the game's most dreaded foes, so it's only fair that the live-action version would be just as dreaded as its counterpart. This deadly enemy, who can literally rip skulls apart, made its dramatic and fatal arrival in Episode 5. The Bloater emerged from a collapsed underground passage with a swarm of clickers in tow. Barry Gower, the show's prosthetics designer, gave birth to this abomination in the live-action series. This Emmy winner has built monsters and special effects of all kinds, including Vecna from Stranger Things and the Night King from Game of Thrones. His most recent invention is the Bloater, which combines CGI with a cumbersome, functional costume. The 6'6" giant Adam Basil was picked to play the Bloater. The UK stuntman had previously worked with Gower on Game of Thrones, and according to the prosthetic designer, he was the ideal build, girth, and fitness for this beast. Gower recommended him to The Last of Us creators Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann. They then molded the creature using a full cast of Basil's body, and Gower revealed exactly how they did that. To make the Bloater prosthesis, they had a whole copy of his body, which they modeled over in modeling clay. Each part of the body was sculpted and cast individually. This just goes to show how intense the casting was for the series. Speaking of which, did you know the show had a movement camp for the extras? Yes, you've heard that right. Actors will occasionally undergo specific training or even a boot camp in order to prepare for their roles. This varies depending on the plot of the film or television show. It's helpful if the actors in your film have to learn new techniques or work together for the first time. And The Last of Us took that to the next level. Some of the extras reportedly attended a movement boot camp in order to prepare for their roles as zombies. Talk about determination. Neil also talked about using a movement boot camp to help direct the extras during the shooting of some scenes, like the Capitol scene in Episode 2, for example. According to him, they had to cast dozens of infected, put them in full prosthetic makeup, and have a movement boot camp where they have to train to move like the infected. The extras probably practiced their motions in full makeup and prosthetics during boot camp too, so that they'd be prepared for what to expect during production. Neil went on to say that he thinks the show is really good and that he would have loved it even if he wasn't in it. The CEO was amazed by how much love Craig Mazin and the rest of the cast and crew put into this. He mentioned that it makes him feel like this thing they made at Naughty Dog is respected in a way he's never felt before. Neil also revealed that it overwhelms him sometimes so much that he'd cry. Speaking of which, Neil actually cried while watching a few of the episodes. Discussing one of the scenes from episode 8, Neil revealed that it was the most important scene in the game and the show.
The doors are locked, and I have the keys. Ellie? Ellie!
The scene in question is when Ellie kills the frightening cult leader, David. The freak wanted her to marry him and bear loads of his children. Ew. For Neil Druckmann, this was the game's climax because it marked the first time that Ellie wasn't saved by Joel. She saved herself. Although Ellie had killed before, this was different. You could tell that she's grown now. Druckmann claimed that the sequence marks the end of their journey from icy strangers to finding family. And if it didn't work in the game, the tale as a whole would have failed. It was effective in the game, but he still felt the same way about the show. While discussing this scene in particular, Neil said that Bella Ramsey did an amazing job at playing someone who isn't fully present in the scene, and suddenly, Pedro grabs her, and his eyes say, "I couldn't protect you from this," with a mournful expression. The sadness in that scene was just too much. Neil revealed that he was crying, and that he was so sad, and not just because he had tears in his eyes, it's like waterworks. He said that he picked up his phone and texted Craig a single sentence saying, "We did it." After the tough and intense casting and training, all this was to be expected. Speaking of which, Neil went over a lot of Ellie's before picking up Ramsey. Yes, that's right. He watched more than 100 auditions for Ellie before he saw Bella Ramsey's. When he saw her performance, he said that it didn't feel like he was watching someone act like Ellie. Rather, it felt like he was looking at Ellie. Neil revealed that they were looking for someone who could play a 14-year-old, and it's really hard to find a good actor who could play a kid. Beyond that, they needed someone who could be strange, who pushes back, and someone who seems like everything they do has the potential to be violent or cruel. No wonder they had to go through 100 auditions. Neil also said that they also needed someone who was young, but very smart for their age. According to him, all of those things came naturally to Bella. He went on to say that they just happened to find Ellie in real life and put her on the show. I'm glad it all worked out. Thankfully, this wasn't the case when it came time to cast Joel. Pedro Pascal quickly agreed to take on the role of Joel after receiving the script. After a brief Zoom conversation with Neil, it was decided that he would play the part. And honestly, I'm happy things worked out the way they did, because I can't imagine the show without anyone else. So, from movement boot camps to many hours searching for the right actress, those were some of the moments behind the scenes that made The Last of Us possible.